Today we will do a few short readings from the first introduction by Juliet Mitchell of Juliet Mitchell and Jacqueline Rose's book, Jacques Lacan and L'école Freudienne. The first introduction is by the first editor of the book, and that is Juliet Mitchell. I would like you to use this lecture as a short reading, as a close reading, and as a guided reading for your own study of the text. It will not substitute for reading the text, of course, but hopefully will add some depth and some insight to what you're reading. And I'd like you to start with page 2 at the paragraph that begins, "For all psychoanalysts," and I'll continue, "For all psychoanalysts, the development of the human subject, its unconscious and its sexuality go hand in hand," meaning they cannot be separated from each other. As Juliet Mitchell puts it, they are causatively intertwined. And I'm going to skip down a little bit. Psychoanalysis cannot make a distinction between a person and his or her sexuality. A person is formed through their sexuality. It could not be added to him and to her. And as we've talked about, there is always an assignment of a gender, a boy or a girl, man or a woman, to a human being. And even in cases of gender confusion, we get a little disconcerted by that. We always want to pin somebody down and know, are they a man or are they a woman? Are they a girl or a boy? And there's something almost fundamental to that knowledge about somebody else in order to understand who they are. And that's what is meant by the idea that there's no personhood outside of sexuality. It's not like there's an individual person and then they become a male or a female. You're born into being a male or a female. And in this seminar, we're looking at the ways that society constructs meaning around that. We are taking the position that biology is not destiny, that culture is what determines manhood or womanhood, not biology, not anatomy per se. So I'd like you to look at page 3, right in the middle of the page in the paragraph that says, Lacan believed that though all psychoanalysts subscribe to the importance of the unconscious and to the privileged position of sexuality within the development of the human subject, the way in which many post-Freudians have elaborated their theories ultimately reduces or distorts the significance even of those fundamental postulates. So Lacan was a clinician. He derived his theories from actual patients, from a long medical practice, and only after many years of practicing as a medical doctor, psychoanalyst, did he write his theories and his lectures, which have given us the body of his work that we know as Lacanian theory today. I'm going to go back to the text. To Lacan, most current psychoanalytic thinking is tangled up in popular ideologies and thus misses the revolutionary nature of Freud's work. Lacan is a Freudian and believes that a lot of people read Freud wrong. For Lacan, many of those psychoanalysts replicate what is in Freud's theory, its revolutionary nature. Psychoanalysis should not subscribe to ideas about how men and women do or should live as sexually differentiated beings, but instead it should analyze how they come to be such beings in the first place. How do we get to associate our identity with manhood or womanhood? That's what Lacan is talking about. Not whether we're born a man or a woman biologically, but how culture inscribes upon us in the order of culture and language, which Lacan called the symbolic order, the meaning of that sexuality. And what I'd like you to do now is go to page 4 and look at the last paragraph on that page, and we'll do some close reading of that paragraph. The humanistic conception of mankind assumes that the subject exists from the beginning. The subject is the person. In a way, it's the person almost taken apart from his or her sexuality, although we're also understanding paradoxically that there is no personhood apart from sexuality. At least by implication, ego psychologists, object relations theorists, and Kleinians base themselves on the same premise, that there's a person there outside or apart from the sexuality. Lacan does not believe that. For this reason, Lacan considers that in the last analysis, they are more ideologues, people that just kind of promote their own theory, than theorists of psychoanalysis. In the Freud that Lacan uses, in Freud's work that Lacan is basing his theory on, in other words, neither the unconscious nor sexuality can in any degree be pre-given facts. They are constructions, and hence the name of this seminar, which is in its subtitle, The Efficacy of the Constructed Self. We're looking at the way selfhood is constructed through gender, through language, to comprise our identity as human beings in society. That is, they are objects with histories, and the human subject itself is only formed within these histories. As we've discussed in the residency, we are born into almost a preordained set of expectations that are structured for us through language in terms of our parents' and society's expectations of what we will become. It is this history of the human subject in its generality, human history, and its particularity, the specific life of the individual, as it manifests itself in unconscious fantasy life, that psychoanalysis traces. And that's where we come in looking at the way that this theory can help us, not to explain everything, or certainly to explain it away, but to help us understand the traces of our psychic life through sexuality as it manifests in our own human life. So let's go then to the top of page 5 and look at the phrase that's in italics there, comes into being. We're looking at the way that people are constructed, that people's identity comes into being. Let's look at the last sentence of that next paragraph, the first paragraph on page 5. The human subject is created from a general law that comes to it from outside itself and through the speech of other people, though this speech in turn must relate to the general law. So the law is subject to the constructs of the symbolic order, and it has to follow certain structures that then in turn structure us as human beings as we come into being. So let's then look again to the end of the next paragraph to further that thought. Lacan's human subject is not a divided self, as in R.D. Laing's work, that in a different society could be made whole. So our objective in looking at psychoanalysis is not to say somebody got all messed up and needs to be put back together again like Humpty Dumpty. Lacan's theory says that we can't put other people back together, we can't put ourselves back together, we can't ever be fully whole, but we can live according to the truth of our own psychic structure. And in another place we looked at, that was called living according to the slope of one's desire, or to overcome the deadlocks of one's desire, to come into alignment with one's true desire and live in accordance with it authentically, but not really to put ourselves back together as whole, as if that could be done anyway. But a self which is only actually and necessarily created within a split, a being that can only conceptualize itself when it is mirrored back to itself from the position of another's desire. And we're going to talk a lot about othering, the way the gaze is it's referring to our tendency to always be looking out, aware of who's looking at us and how we're constituted as a human being, as a subject or an object for somebody else. So let's look at the last line of that page and say that Lacan states that desire itself, and going to the top of page 6, and with it sexual desire, can only exist by virtue of its alienation. Now that's a very important point. What that means is, as we've talked about already, that desire is by definition unfulfillable. We can never really get to the object of our desire, and that is mirrored in language, as we've discussed, where the signifier can never exactly equal what it's trying to signify. So there's the slippage of the signifier and the signified. That difference between what a word is aiming toward and what we're trying to make it mean is replicated in the psyche of the individual, in that whatever it is that we think we desire or that we want and we're trying to achieve cannot ever be totally fulfilled, because once we receive that, it's not exactly what we wanted in the first place. It's almost like smoking. If you've ever tried to quit smoking, and you do quit smoking for a permanent time or for a short time, you know that sometimes you desire that cigarette, and then when you have it, it's not what you really wanted. It doesn't really fulfill the desire, because what you wanted was the desire for the cigarette. Maybe what you wanted was the ritual of smoking. Maybe what you wanted was the nicotine. But somehow whatever you use to fill that desire is never enough. That's why there's always another cigarette waiting behind that one. Okay, and there are many other examples we could think of in life that are like that. So let's look at that middle of the paragraph on the top of page 6 and look at this sentence. Desire persists as an effect of a primordial absence. There's always this absence in the center of our being as human beings, but we don't have to bemoan that. According to Lacan, as long as we accept that and we line ourselves up in accordance with that understanding, we don't have to fight it, and we don't have to strive for something that's impossible, which is a fundamental wholeness. We will never be whole as human beings. Mythologically, religiously, we can look at the story of the Garden of Eden. We will never get back to that perfect state of being before Eve had Adam eat the apple. Once that was done, things were set in motion, we can't ever go back. And to understand that is to be fully present in our own lives. Next paragraph. This account of sexual desire, this idea that we're always striving towards something we can't really achieve, and that even if we achieve the object of our desire, it's not really going to be exactly what we want, because we always want something more. As it led Freud to his adamant rejection of any theory of the difference between the sexes in terms of pre-given male or female entities which complete and satisfy each other. So in the classic rendition of sexuality, we believe a man and a woman satisfy each other. Well, on one level, yes, but on many psychic levels, no. And we know that we can't look to another human being to fulfill our desire. Okay, so next sentence. Sexual difference can only be the consequence of a division. Without this division, it would cease to exist. But it must exist because no human being can become a subject outside the division between the two sexes. So it's a paradox, and we have to accept paradox at the root of human consciousness. We've divided into two sexes. The two sexes appear to complement each other, but never can fully do so. Just like a signifier can never fully represent the signified in language. Okay, Foucault talks about how grammar represents that split in the human psyche, and how the subject and predicate of a sentence never completely match up. The relation between the subject and the object, even in a sentence, also represent the fluid nature of desire and represent the split in the human consciousness, because they can never fully explain, language can never fully explain its intended meaning, nor can the word ever fully represent what it is intended to do. We'll come back to this idea in our next session.